Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Inspiration Collection Network. Make sure that if you haven't already, take the time to watch the video titled How to Master Drawing with Zero Experience, where we drew each one of these shapes and forms as an exercise for hand stability and to begin to understand 3D form. Today's video builds further into that concept, how to master drawing three-dimensional form through surface mapping. And if you want to build even further into this, you can watch my other video titled The Prism Method and 3D Mapping, which is how we are able to capture three-dimensional form on a flat surface. And before you start with complex references, you have to get really good at controlling your pencil and your line work. You have to be able to make hatching in every single direction and to control what we call line quality, which basically means how dark, light, thick, or thin a line goes. And today's exercise is to help you train your ability to stay within specific shapes and boundaries with your line work, and creating the illusion of depth with values while using directional hatching to map out the 3D form that you are trying to capture. One of the ways I can explain this is by mapping out the curvature of a rounded object with curved hatching. This is to say that the specific motion of your lines helps to explain the three-dimensional form which you are drawing. And this requires really careful and methodical use of your drawing materials. So if you have these sketches already done from the last video, what we're going to do is we're going to shade in or fill in the specific shapes that map out the figure which we are capturing. So if we're shading in this box and the lighting is coming from this direction, let's look at this plane on the side. It's going either up or down or at a diagonal, and this line helps us see that direction. So we're going to use diagonal hatching going from left to right all the way through as carefully as possible. And then we're going to cross hatch going downwards all the way through the shape. And notice how we went in only one direction. There is no right or wrong, but I want you to alternate every possible individual direction that you can hatch to help stabilize the muscles that control that motion in your hand, because you're going to become really comfortable with a single direction at some point, but you want to retain full control regardless of the direction that you are hatching. Don't treat this exercise like a coloring book. Rather, try to make sure that you get really good at carefully mapping out each line in the direction that the plane is going. We were mapping out the diagonals of the top plane, and now we're going to do horizontal lines for this plane facing the viewers. And again, try to make sure that while you're hatching, at least the first layer, do it at only one direction, and then alternate it if you want to the other direction so that the muscles in your hand get used to that individual motion. You'll notice that certain directions are harder for you as an individual, and those are the ones that you want to work on the most. The challenge here is to do the lines perfectly fitted to the shape that you're filling in. Notice in this one, I've shaded each one of the box's faces, but I'm going to add one more layer of value to the plane on the far left. And an extra challenge you can do here is to make the top plane only slightly darker than the plane facing the viewer, to train yourself in the concept of controlling values. Okay, with this next one, I want to mention that as a rule of thumb, when you're filling in a long shape, you want to make your initial hatching perpendicular to its length, which means you use the shortest line that fits in the shape. And again, if you go one direction with the first shape, you'll alternate it to the opposite direction on the next one. And just for the fun of it, the last one, I want you to fill it in with diagonal hatching. This helps you to manage your line length as it fluctuates from short to long and back to short. And you'll find each of these scenarios as you move forward with drawing and your studies. Now with this next shape, I'm going to use the directional hatching, but I'm going to go both directions as I fill it in. And I'm going to alternate with horizontal and diagonal hatching, and same with the one on the bottom left. Diagonal hatching going both directions and horizontal hatching going both directions. And I'm going to do the same thing for the plane on the right, but I'm going to keep my value really soft, so it's mid-tone. The hatching, the directional hatching that we do, helps to tell the eyes of the viewers what direction that plane is moving towards. So controlling your direction helps you to technically sculpt the form on a flat surface. Now with the sphere, it's a lot more complicated because you have to understand the rounded surface you're dealing with. The ellipses that we work with help us to understand how that figure would be affected by light. So if the light's coming in from the right, the left side would be shaded in. And notice how I'm hatching in the direction dictated by this curve of the ellipse, trying to make sure that I'm mapping out the curvature of the sphere as I'm shading it in. And then you're going to go in the direction of the shadow edge, and I want you to try to do the first bit of blending, where you take the shadow tone and you move it lightly into the light area, creating a midtone, as the shadows creep into the light area. And doing this helps you to map out the shadow edge. And if you notice, the shadow edge on mine is becoming darker than the regular shadow on the left side. So we're not just filling in random shapes here, we're trying to make sure that we map the direction or the curvature of the surface of this form. And this specific exercise helps to train your hand to sculpt around organic rounded form. Now for this wide base cylinder, we're going to follow a similar formula. The top plane is flat, so you're free to hatch in any direction that you'd like to fill in that shape with a light tone. And for the height of the sphere, you'll use both diagonal and vertical lines as you go around the surface of the cylinder. And again, we're going to choose that the light is coming from the right side, so we're going to stop about halfway. And then we'll map out the curvature with single curved lines from the left edge going towards the center, trying to keep or maintain the roundness of the cylinder. And then we're going to come back to the shadow edge and add that blending work again, just softly moving those lines towards the light area to create that midtone, all the while intensifying the shadow edge. Remember that this video is an exercise to perfect your ability to map the shadows on any figure that you draw. This is how I'm able to do every one of my drawings, regardless of how complicated the surface is. Everything starts at the basic shapes. Before I move on, I'm going to add a little definition to the top plane to help make the form a little clearer. And a little challenge that I want you to try is the shadow transition. I want you to try to do the blending with two types of hatching. One that goes parallel to the shadow edge and another that follows a curve from the shadow to the light area. And this one might not make too much sense at first because it feels like you're risking taking too much of that shadow into the light area and messing up your transition. But it'll actually help you when moving into more complex form and textured surfaces. The moment you start seeing your flat images as three-dimensional form and trying to sculpt that with your pencil, the quality of your drawings is going to change drastically. Now, this is probably the first time you're seeing these ribbon drawings because they're going to be included in one of my upcoming videos where I explain something I call the ribbon method. But for now, what I want you to get out of this is the idea that every shape that you fill has to have intention in regards to the direction that you make your line work. You have to train your eyes and your mind to analyze what you're looking at critically to understand how the surface behaves. And you can even give yourself mapping guidelines to understand how you're going to curve your hatching. And like I said before, this is mainly an exercise to help your hands develop stability while your eyes and mind develop the ability to map out three-dimensional form on a flat surface. So any person that has any doubt in their own ability to draw, or they feel like they don't have steady enough hands, these exercises are specifically made for you. Now, with this moon shape, I'm going to go ahead and have a little bit of fun and make up an imaginary object. And for every single line that you add, you have to imagine how that affects the three-dimensional form that you're working with. This kind of looks like a ring. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little more solid. And I'm going to try and add a dividing line through the center. What I'm doing here is tricky because this imaginary ring is facing me at a weird angle. The perspective is strange. And the new curved line helps to map out the curvature of the ring. And then I can go through the entire surface and add modeling guidelines to understand how rounded the outside surface area is, and then how flat the internal area is. This is the level of understanding that you want to develop to eventually create a believable illusion of depth and form. And if the light is coming from the right side, I can imagine that the internal area doesn't get too much light because it's not facing the light source, and the left side of the ring would also be shaded because it's facing away from the light. So even though I didn't have a reference, I simply imagined how this form would behave towards the light with its imagined form. And you would be surprised how much of the entire process of drawing from references requires you to imagine part of the form that you can't see. This is why playing around with this concept is very useful. So hopefully by this point, you're seeing how even though drawing is a complex science, the base is actually very simple, and the exercises that you can do to improve are highly accessible even to people who are trying it for the first time. There is no right or wrong in this case. You are experimenting with directional hatching to get your hand used to each direction that you could use your pencil, and trying to understand how each direction helps to map out the form. And it's always best to use a reference so that you're not just making up what you're looking at, but you're actually noticing exactly what happens when light hits an object. But like I mentioned before, it's very useful to try to imagine these three-dimensional forms and then simulate how they would be affected by light, which planes would be shaded, and what the cast shadows being dropped by the form would look like. All of this is imaginary, but it's very useful to experiment with it so that when it comes to actually copying a reference down, your mind doesn't only copy it, but rather fully understands it. The more you experiment with this, the more you'll be able to identify all of the aspects that describe reality. Just remember to keep using the directional hatching to help emphasize the form. And as a rule of thumb, don't turn the paper when a certain direction is difficult. Rather, allow your hand to train in that direction specifically. Now, for the 2 stars, I'm going to use the direction of the center lines to help me understand how to shade, and I'm going to imagine that the light is coming from the right side, so I'm going to shade this as if it's a 3-dimensional prism, trying to imagine that the center point rises up towards the viewer a little bit. Now for the compass star, we're just going to shade it in pattern, so alternating between white and black all the way around, using short, careful hatching. And throughout this exercise, remember that each shape and form that we drew serves a bigger purpose when understanding more complex references. These simple exercises help you to develop critical thinking. For example, if the light is coming from the top right, I can make sure that this bottom left plane is also shaded to describe the 3-dimensional form even further. And the more you think about it, the more you can add to the form, like the cast shadow being dropped by the top and right points. Imagining form is one of the most useful tools for actually capturing it when you are looking at your references. And like I said at the beginning, all of these may seem very simple, but they are all essential exercises to be able to master drawing in the long run. They help to train your hand-eye coordination, the stability of your line work, and your mind's ability to understand 3-dimensional form on a flat surface. And all of this comes together when capturing even the most complex references in nature. If you'd like to understand how to use these methods to accurately draw absolutely anything, you can sign up for my 10-day Fundamental Drawing Secrets Master Course. You'll find a link to that in the description below, along with a link to access my free drawing masterclass. Make sure that you leave any questions that you have about drawing or art in the comments. Make sure to like the video, and make sure to subscribe so that you're updated when I upload new videos. Thank you so much for your time and your passion. I will see you all on the next video.